So Noah, talk to me a little bit about some ties that you've made to the community as a Spanish teacher, and we'll talk a little bit of kind of how world language teachers make those ties with the community.
Yeah, and you're talking community like opportunities to go beyond the four walls of the class and actually, explore meaningfulness and kind of authentic use of the language and culture, right?
Yes, definitely.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that that's for me one of the places where things can just get so real for our learners and
Hmm.
and engaging them, right? That this is not just about finishing worksheets and getting a grade, that this is something you can actually use. And so, I think when we explore opportunities for that, one of the most important things that comes from it is the instilling of risk taking, right? That
Hmm.
when I was in college and studied abroad in Madrid and you know they're basically almost the entire cohort was going out to O'Brien's every night.
Mm.
That they were not taking risks. They were not engaging in the language and culture. They were really just kind of studying abroad and partying. And
Hmm.
and part of that might have been their motivations, but part of it might have also been just comfort with you know people like me who went ahead and went to the cafe and went up to some old guy with his cafecito and his pastel and said, hola, puedo practicar,
Yeah.
and that sort of risk taking, I think, can really be facilitated by us as instructors and teachers by, fostering opportunities to, I used to have an activity where, the kids didn't know that the restaurants knew they were going to call, but I would actually have a restaurant say, yeah, if we see your number on caller ID from we'll answer and talk to them. And I would have them call and ask, what's the special of the day? And do you have delivery? And, things like that.
Mhm.
And it gives them the opportunity to actually use it. And then they're in front of their whole class, they're worried, they're nervous. And then afterwards they get to say, wow, that actually was okay. Like, even though my Spanish wasn't good, like perfect, they understood what I was trying to say.
Mhm.
And, I think that there's just, you can't really overstate the value of those sort of authentic opportunities to use the language. And it's really in any language. It's definitely, those of us in Spanish, teaching Spanish language and culture have a little bit of an advantage to, in most places in the United States, but also, I saw a project at, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the name of the university, but in the Memphis area in Tennessee, where it was a German professor and they used their German to go out and to the German expat community and create a authentic web page of basically the history of how different people from German backgrounds ended up in the area. And
Mhm.
what a neat kind of artifact for the community and a legacy piece that allowed them to approach people, use the language, and immerse themselves in the culture in a way that had nothing to do with you know grammar or successful completion of a worksheet or something like that.
Yeah, and that authentic use, that's so important. And, like I would always take kids to Le Central, which is since been closed in Denver, but, just making sure whether they were level 1 or level 4, that they would order their food in French, they would use the language, make sure the wait staff, some of the wait staff didn't know French, to make sure we got wait staff that knew French, right? And having that opportunity wherever you can, right? Whether it's the film festival that's going on, whether it's some
Mm.
type of cultural, relevant activity. And, I think you've also taken students to UNC for World Language Days at some point.
I have actually never taken a part in that, but I know others who have, and I think that's just an amazing opportunity. And there's,
Mm-hmm.
we have colleagues who, put blood, sweat, and tears into making sure that event happens. And,
Mm-hmm.
I'm just super grateful for all they do. And I think stuff like that is totally perfect. I love your example of La Central, the film festivals, for whether you're hearing this and you're in, the Denver metro area or beyond, there's the Denver Film Center.
Mm-hmm.
They will put together a program for you and your students of short films from your target language and culture, and
Mm-hmm.
they will even they've figured out how to do it in a virtual place where they can on demand create a virtual program for you, and they may even be able to reach out and get directors and actors from some of those films to
Wow.
do a talk back with you and your students for no more than the price of the movie tickets. So don't hesitate to basically, I think the biggest thing, like you experienced with La Central, is when we as teachers are willing to take the risk and just go
Mm-hmm.
ahead and ask, you know,
Mm-hmm.
magic can happen for our students. The worst thing that's going to happen with our own risk taking is somebody's going to say, yeah, I'm not really interested in helping out. But the best thing that happens is people say, that's really cool, thanks for asking. Yes. And that I've had, a lot of Spanish teachers will show, there's a cute Puerto Rican movie called The Election, I think was what it was
Mm-hmm.
called. And super fun little movie about a high school election. And I just emailed I've looked up the directors. There was two brothers, and I emailed them, and they were like, sure, we'll Zoom with your class.
Mm-hmm.
I've had, Grammy award winning artists who've, been guests in the classroom. And, I've had way more guests who just never answered my email or who said
Mm-hmm.
no. Right. But for the ones who do, you create this amazing experience. That there was a Spanish language speaking, PR arm at the Environmental Protection Agency that would do a chat room with my class every Earth Day about, hey
Wow.
kids, what are you doing to be Verde?
Mm-hmm.
These are just amazing opportunities that, we really just have to, ask, put yourself in a position to hear no, and maybe you give somebody else an opportunity to tell you yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's so important, I think, in terms of teaching language and not knowing when our students are necessarily going to be able to visit the target country. They might be able to do some study abroad if they go to a four-year college, but that's not necessarily the case with a lot of students we teach. So giving them those opportunities where they are here where we live, and most major cities have some type of film center or other cultural opportunities where the teachers can connect with those businesses. I wanted to talk a little bit about thoughts on how world language teaching might change post-pandemic. We have a lot of things like the veteran teachers versus the newer teachers, and some methods that are more coming to in prevalence, and it kind of using technology and versus not using technology. I know there's been a shift for a while, but there's a lot of veteran teachers that aren't necessarily comfortable with some of the, I would say, newer methods of the last 10 years.
Mm. Hmm. Yeah, I think that, one thing that the starting point says is just recognizing whether it's, on the pedagogy or on
Yeah.
the educational technology, kind of components, just how far we've come in a really short
Yeah.
amount of time. That, there's certain things that used to be, kind of fringe use cases and presentations at state world language teacher conferences that are now, not, hey, here's a way of doing things, but rather, this is the way we do things.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That things like, I think that in a not too distant future, people aren't really going to talk about blended learning as this thing you could do. Blended
Mm-hmm.
learning is just
Yeah.
what we do, and I think that we should definitely. It's worthwhile to acknowledge, that as much we can always grow, and there's lots of room forward for us to go. But I think we should also really kind of pat ourselves on the back and our colleagues on the back for how far we've come in a really short amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
Relatively speaking, on those fronts, I think that age is probably not a really great predictor
Yeah.
of elasticity or comfort with new things or change. I think that somebody who's 23 years old, fresh out of college, and they wanted to become a French teacher because they just love the way their French teacher did it.
Mm-hmm.
Might be
Mm-hmm.
you know more sort of, I guess the word might be traditional, and wedded to old ways than somebody who, is later career, but looking for something new. So, I think that I hate to, you know, I'm remiss to think of it in terms of sides anyway, but
Yeah.
definitely
Yeah.
not in terms of age. I think that, places we've come on the technology though is viewing it as, just this massive assist to the way we
Mm-hmm.
do things, ways of working smarter, not harder. I think that a lot of teachers who maybe were more resistant to using educational technology in the past and had, basically were forced over the last 2 years to go that
Mm-hmm.
way because of the pandemic. I think that, one of the things they started to realize is, oh, wow, like I work really hard to, on the folder at the front of the room for if you were gone yesterday. And if I use this technology now, like I just create things once and then it's on the student part, right? Where
Yeah.
I can all of a sudden use this technology to create opportunities for students to really have agency and
Mm-hmm.
own some of that responsibility for their own learning. And I free up all this time for myself to do things, I'm more excited about than the homework folder. I think that things like formative assessment are places where people are realizing like, oh, this is a really powerful and a huge, time saver for me. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think that on the technology side, there's a lot of people who maybe were resistant to it, that out of necessity went there and have kind of had this kind of delightful kind of epiphany that, oh, some of these things maybe I was resistant because I didn't want to be pushed into something I wasn't interested in. But now that I'm there, the view from this side is kind of nice.
Mm-hmm.
On the pedagogy side, I think that that there's a lot of things there that are probably way more in the weeds for people who were language teachers versus people who aren't. I think that one of the things that I've learned is that absolutism is probably not where it's at. That's a slippery slope, and I think that especially when we think not just internally about our own practices, but our colleagues around us, our department mates,
Mm-hmm.
that's using language like you should, you shouldn't, you have to, you can't,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you need to, a lot of times like whatever words come after that are just
Mm-hmm.
falling on deaf ears.
Yeah.
That there's not a lot of people who are thrilled with having other people talk at them in those kinds of ways versus that feel a lot more like pushing them towards something rather than inviting them with an extended hand to help pull.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think that's where I fall on that. And then, I think the one place that I think we've made tremendous gains, and it's just really exciting for where it goes from here, is, the notion of looking at world languages from a proficiency lens. That this
Yeah.
is stuff that, even just 5 and 6 and 7 years ago was still very, kind of cutting edge, that now, seems to be really more the way people are approaching things of, what does Spanish 1 or Spanish 2 or Spanish 3 mean,
Mm-hmm.
from school to school, city to city, much less, just room 211 to room 212. It
Yeah.
can have wildly different meanings. And, we are really lucky in our content area to have these, really well thought out experts, working on these proficiency levels, complete with can-do statements, so that in a, just really accessible, and relatively objective way, we have these look fors of what can somebody do, and
Mm-hmm.
based off of what they can do, helping them understand where they are on the continuum of proficiency. And I think that that's really powerful, for learners. I think it's really powerful for teachers. I think it's really powerful for connecting learners with opportunities where they'll be able to use their language and cultural skills in the real world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that'll continue to evolve since I've been in the field for about 21 years, and I just the actual proficiency guidelines, they come out with like you say about every 5 or 6 years they revise them, and I think if as a school, if there is some type of I think test to test into a level, right, a proficiency test, because you're saying there is discrepancy in the same building sometimes, right? About what a
Yeah.
level should look like. And, you're having kids coming from the middle school into level 2, or you're having kids that took 2 years in another state and they're going into level 3, right? And that's that was when I was in the classroom, that was often my pet peeve, is like, yeah, you're in level 3, but did you learn this? So kind of more schools, using those can-do statements, proficiency guidelines, kind of having more of a streamlined process, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it helps everybody involved when we have
Yeah.
this sort of, I guess at the end of the day, they can serve as meaning making vehicles
Yeah.
that help us, kind of have apples to apples. And, I also think that it helps us think about things not just from how we are served by language educators, but how our
Mm-hmm.
learners are served. And,
Yeah.
if we have a student who's, placed based off of just, well, you did really well in middle school, so you skipped to level 2 in high school, and they are, it's a challenge for which they're not ready. Then,
Mm-hmm.
we haven't done them a service. They're going to have a bad experience. And on the flip side, maybe they come in and because of their middle school program, actually maybe level 2 is not where they belong. Maybe it's level 4.
Mm-hmm.
And just because that's not the way we do things, maybe all of a sudden we create a really bad experience for that learner, such that, somebody who should have been going on to be an AP and, maybe even taking more than one language, is instead saying, you know what, when it comes to my elective credits, I'm really going to focus on, weightlifting and creative writing. And,
Yeah.
through our, kind of rigidity and this is how we do things,
Yeah.
we might be, unfortunately getting in the way of, uh, creating more, multilingual people in this world.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's also, a lot of those students lose that opportunity, or, they maybe they discover languages later in life or sometime in college. But yeah, I think I would hope going into, the next 20 years, like looking back on the 20 years, that more students are able to keep with the language, or, able to, I would just say retain, and just have more of an interest. Now that there's so much more global use of languages, right? Opportunities to connect, like we talked about, with like filmmakers and other people in the community through Zoom. And, just I think there's so much potential out there. But as we
Yeah,
wrap
I
things
think
up,
that, like, real quick, one point, just one quick add on to that, Danny, that you just made me think about, is every language teacher every year at parent teacher conferences has
yeah,
multiple conversations with a parent who's saying, I wish I would have learned a language. I wish I would
oh
have
yeah,
paid better attention. And, the later you get in your career, the closer you get to having the children of your students.
yeah,
And, that is just a nightmare scenario for me, right? That I'm going to be, at a parent teacher conference with somebody who was one of my students, who's saying,
mm-hmm.
I really wish I would have liked Spanish when I was, I
Mm-hmm.
really wish I would have had a teacher who helped me learn it, and that's me all of a sudden,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so there's a huge responsibility that comes from this.
Yeah, yeah, that's true, right? It's the connections with students, and it's like bringing that language alive, right? And having them really wanting to continue in the language, and seeing the opportunities that will open with that language. Well, out of
Yeah.
everything we talked about today, what's one thing in particular you'd like listeners to remember?
Oh, that is such a great question. I guess really, just when you're the part, given the theme of your podcast about being in the trenches,
Yeah,
and, that is dire as it can feel, and helpless, and, just not good, I
yeah,
guess, is that there's opportunity there for reflection,
yeah,
and that hopefully it's a moment that will pass and you'll get to the other side. And in that experience, did you take advantage of this really bad experience to at least find, the learning that can come from it, so that you can continue to grow and get better, and, be better for yourself, be better for your learners, and your overall learning community, as a result of having had to experience the going through the trenches.
mm-hmm. No, I think that's a great reflection on my podcast title. Well, where can people connect with you and find you online?
Yeah, I'd say the easiest place is on Twitter. That's where I spend most of my time. Not really great at responsiveness on too much else. Even my wife will direct message me on
Mm-hmm.
Twitter if it's something that's where she's trying to get my attention. And I'm at Senorg, Senorg, on Twitter. I also blog a lot at medium.com. And, I'm very easy to go hold of. If you just Google, I'm pretty easy to find. And, if you reach out to me and I don't respond within 24 hours, you don't ever hesitate to just poke and say, hey, did you get my message? Or bumping myself up to the top of your inbox, and I'll get back with you, I promise.
Well, it's been a pleasure having you on the Out of the Trenches podcast. Have a great rest of your day.
You too. Thank you so much for having me.